The universe was quiet. The stars glittered like cold diamonds in the vast darkness, and the distant hum of 1,000 different worlds continued in peaceful rhythm. But not all was calm. Not for Earth. On the distant edges of the galaxy, a new power was emerging. The Tyrant Empire, a vast and deadly force, had already conquered dozens of planets. Their fleets were massive, their weapons powerful, and their arrogance unmatched. They believed they were unstoppable, the masters of the galaxy. And for a time, they were right. As their ships glided through the stars, they set their sights on Earth, the homeworld of humanity. The Tyrant leaders saw it as a small, insignificant planet, a perfect addition to their growing empire. To them, Earth was a mere speck in the grand cosmos, a planet with primitive technology and weak defenses. But they were wrong, and they didn't know it yet. In secret, humanity had been preparing. For years, they had been building something extraordinary beneath the surface of their planet. A weapon so powerful, so advanced, it could change everything. But the Tyrant Empire had no idea. Earth's battleship was hidden in plain sight, deep underground, a sleeping giant waiting for the day it would rise. The first sign of trouble came when the Tyrant fleet dropped out of warp and appeared near Earth's orbit. Their ships, sleek and powerful, hung in the darkness like predators. They began their slow approach toward the planet. Their leaders were confident. They saw no reason to fear. After all, what could a small backward planet do? Inside the Tyrant flagship, Admiral Kresh stood at the observation deck, looking out at the distant Earth. His sharp, calculating eyes scanned the planet below, and a smile tugged at his lips. Another easy conquest, he muttered to himself, not caring if anyone else heard. Another victory for the Empire. The fleet's commanders stood nearby, listening, nodding in agreement. They had seen it all before, worlds that cowered at the sight of their ships. This would be no different. Earth's technology was primitive. Their defenses were laughable. The Tyrant Empire would crush them in hours, maybe less. But something felt off. Something in the air, the quiet before the storm, made Kresh pause. He couldn't shake the feeling that this mission wouldn't be as easy as the others, but he dismissed the thought. It was just nerves. After all, he had conquered entire worlds without breaking the sweat. This would be no different. Meanwhile, on Earth, deep underground, Captain Eric stood in the control room of the secret human warship. The room was bathed in the soft blue glow of the ship's lights, and the hum of its advanced systems echoed through the metal walls. The crew worked silently, their faces tense but focused. They knew the situation was critical. Earth's future depended on what happened next. Eric looked over at his crew, his eyes meeting theirs. They were ready. They had trained for this moment for years. They knew the stakes. If they failed, humanity would fall. But if they succeeded, they could change the fate of the galaxy forever. "We've waited long enough," Captain Eric said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "Prepare the ship for launch. It's time to show them what Earth is capable of." The crew responded without hesitation, moving quickly and efficiently. In the heart of Earth's hidden battleship, the powerful engines roared to life. The ground shook as the massive ship began to rise from its underground base. The Tyrant fleet, still unaware of what was coming, continued its slow march toward Earth. Up above, in the empty vastness of space, the Tyrant ships began to position themselves. Their sensors were scanning the planet, their weapons primed and ready. Admiral Kresh felt a sense of excitement building in his chest. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Soon, the humans would be crushed, and Earth would belong to the Tyrant Empire. But then, something unexpected happened. On the edge of the atmosphere, the human warship emerged from the shadows of Earth's orbit. The ship was enormous, its sleek, dark design unlike anything the Tyrant Empire had ever seen. Its engines burned with a power that stunned the Tyrant sensors, and its weapons were unlike anything in the galaxy. Admiral Kresh's smile faltered as he stared at the ship on his screen. His eyes narrowed in confusion. "What is that?" he demanded. One of his officers checked the readouts, his face turning pale. It's human-made, sir. We didn't detect it before. It was hidden." "Hidden," Kresh repeated, his voice cold. "Impossible." But it wasn't impossible. The humans had been preparing. They had been waiting for this moment. And now, as the Tyrant fleet looked on in shock, the human warship fired its first shot. A massive burst of energy erupted from the ship, lighting up the dark space between Earth and the Tyrant fleet. The blast struck one of the alien ships with terrifying force. It was as if the universe itself had been torn open. The Tyrant fleet staggered back in surprise, its commanders scrambling for answers. They had underestimated humanity. And now, they were paying the price. Admiral Kresh's eyes widened as he realized the gravity of the situation. This is not possible," he whispered. But the evidence was clear. Humanity was not the weak, helpless species they had assumed. The storm had begun. The Tyrant fleet had never seen anything like it. Their ships, sleek and powerful, had been sent to conquer Earth. Nothing more than another easy victory in their long history of expansion. Yet, as they looked at the damage inflicted by the mysterious human battleship, their confidence began to crumble. Admiral Kresh stood frozen, staring at the holographic display. The explosion from the human warship had sent shockwaves through the fleet, tearing apart one of the Tyrant ships with terrifying precision. The ship had been vaporized in an instant, leaving only debris in its wake. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. How could they have built something like that? Kresh muttered to himself. "We've been monitoring Earth for years. There's no way they could have developed this kind of technology." His voice trembled, though he tried to hide it. He had never encountered a species that could turn the tables so quickly. The humans were not supposed to be a threat. Not like this. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Captain Eric watched from the control room as the Tyrant ships adjusted their positions in the distance. They had underestimated the humans, and now the entire fleet was scrambling to recover. The human warship, still cloaked in its shadowy form, hovered silently in space. "Did you see that?" Lieutenant Sarah called out from her station. "We hit them hard. They're retreating." Eric's eyes were sharp, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "This isn't over yet. They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll come at us with everything they've got. We need to stay ahead of them." As the Tyrant ships began to reorganize, the human warship's crew worked quickly to prepare for the next stage of the battle. Captain Eric knew they couldn't let the enemy gather their strength. It was now or never. He turned to his crew. "Focus. We've only just begun. We strike now, before they have the chance to retaliate." Outside, the enemy ships slowly began to turn back, cautiously circling the Earth, assessing their next move. The Tyrant fleet had learned one thing in the last few moments. They couldn't ignore humanity any longer. The human warship had fired first, catching them by surprise. But now, they would regroup, and their assault would come with full force. "Lock onto the nearest Tyrant ship," Eric commanded, his voice cold and calculated. "Let's show them we're not done yet." The crew worked quickly, their hands moving over the consoles in synchronized precision. The weapons of the human warship hummed to life once again, ready to fire. Suddenly, a series of explosions rang out as the first wave of Tyrant weapons slammed into the human ship's shields. The human warship shook, the blast vibrating through the entire hull. Eric held onto the edge of his console, his eyes narrowed in focus. "Shields are holding, Captain," Sarah reported. "They're strong, but they're not giving up." Eric nodded. "I didn't expect them to." The human warship began to move, slowly at first, but then with increasing speed. The Tyrant fleet launched another wave of fire, but this time, the human warship dodged the blasts with surprising agility. Its movements were fast and unpredictable, and the Tyrant ships found it difficult to track. As the battle raged on, Eric felt a sense of calm. It was almost as if the human ship had a life of its own, its movements guided by something beyond mere technology. The crew had trained for this moment, but even they couldn't deny that there was something special about their ship. It was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of humanity's determination. The Tyrant fleet, once so sure of its victory, began to show signs of vulnerability. The ships grew more scattered, and their attacks less focused. Eric could see the fear in their eyes, even if they didn't show it. The humans had struck first, and now they were fighting back with a ferocity the Tyrant Empire had never imagined. Suddenly, another explosion rocked the Tyrant fleet. A second Tyrant ship was destroyed, disintegrating in a brilliant flash of light. This time, the humans had targeted their engine core, causing a catastrophic chain reaction. "They're breaking," Lieutenant Sarah shouted, her voice filled with disbelief. The once unshakable confidence of the Tyrant commanders was beginning to crack. Admiral Kresh watched in horror as one of his ships disintegrated in the blink of an eye, his hands clenched into fists, his knuckles turning white. He had underestimated humanity. And now it was too late to turn back. "Alert all ships," Kresh barked. "We need to regroup. We need reinforcements." But deep down, he knew that the situation was slipping out of his control. The humans were not the weaklings they had thought. They had fought back, and now the Tyrant Empire was facing a new, unanticipated enemy. The storm had arrived, and the Tyrant Empire was on the losing side. Back aboard the human warship, Eric stood tall, staring at the glowing screen in front of him. The Tyrant fleet was in chaos. They had underestimated humanity. Now they would feel the full force of the Earth's might. "This is just the beginning," Eric said, his voice resolute. "Let them see what happens when they push us too far." The crew was ready. The battle had just begun. And this time, it was the humans who would dictate the terms. Admiral Kresh stood on the bridge of his flagship, fury burning in his eyes as he watched the chaos unfolding. The human warship had struck again, and this time it was worse. The once pristine fleet was now in disarray. 2 Tyrant ships had been destroyed in rapid succession, leaving only smoldering wreckage in space. The remaining ships struggled to reorganize and reestablish a coordinated assault. Kresh clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He had underestimated humanity. He had believed them to be primitive, unprepared, easy to crush. Yet here they were, fighting back with a fury he had never seen. It was as if the humans had unleashed a force they hadn't even known they possessed. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice coming through his comm system. "Admiral, we've lost contact with 2 more ships," reported Lieutenant Vanna, his voice strained with urgency. Kresh's hands tightened around the control panel. He had no idea how the humans had managed to disrupt his fleet so effectively, but he knew one thing for certain. The battle was far from over. He needed to regroup, to launch a counterattack. "Send out the reinforcements," Kresh ordered. "We need to overwhelm them. Now." Meanwhile, on Earth's warship, Captain Eric stared at the visual display in front of him. The Tyrant fleet, though battered and shaken, was regrouping. It was clear that their earlier success had not been enough to end the conflict. The humans had made a significant dent, but the Tyrant forces were far from finished. "We've caused them damage, but they're pulling back," Lieutenant Sarah said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "They're not done yet." Eric's mind worked quickly. He knew that time was running out. The longer they allowed the Tyrant fleet to recover, the more dangerous they would become. If they didn't strike now, their hard-earned advantage could slip away. "No," Eric replied, his voice low but firm. "We push forward. We take the fight to them before they can regroup." The human warship's crew immediately set to work. Weapons systems powered up, shields adjusted to maximum strength, and the ship's cloaking mechanism activated once again. Captain Eric knew that they had to act fast, before the Tyrant fleet could bring in their reinforcements. "Prepare to jump," Eric ordered. "We're going straight for the heart of their formation." "How many?" Eric asked. 25 ships, Sarah replied, pulling up the data on the screen. They got reinforcements too, but it looks like most of them are still regrouping. They'll be ready to strike soon. The situation was critical. Eric knew that if they didn't act quickly, the Tyrant would gain the upper hand. The human warship, though powerful, wasn't invincible. The enemy's strength was still overwhelming, and the Tyrant had the advantage of sheer numbers. But that wasn't the whole story. Humans weren't afraid to fight. No, they were driven. It was that spirit, that determination, that had brought them this far, and it would carry them through this next battle. Divert all power to the weapons, Eric ordered. Prepare for a direct assault. We're not waiting for them to come to us. We take the fight to them. The crew immediately moved into action, working as a well-oiled machine. The human warship began its maneuvering, its stealth technology cloaking them once more. The bridge was alive with activity as the crew calculated their attack angles and calculated the most effective strategy. This was the moment they had been training for, the turning point that would decide whether they could hold their ground or lose everything. I want all long-range weapons primed and ready, Eric continued, his voice cold and focused. We make them regret ever thinking they could invade Earth. Below, deep in the belly of the ship, the weapon systems hummed to life. Eric knew their firepower was immense, but the Tyrant's ships were no slouches. This was going to be a brutal fight. Out in space, the Tyrant fleet began to take position, their ships lining up in a formation designed for an all-out attack. They were ready, but they didn't know what was coming. As Eric and his crew set their course, the human warship cloaked once more, disappearing into the vastness of space. From the outside, it was as though the ship had vanished completely, until it reappeared, emerging directly behind one of the Tyrant's lead ships. In a flash, the human warship fired a barrage of high-powered energy blasts, striking the Tyrant ship's engines. The Tyrant ship didn't stand a chance. It exploded into a fiery cloud of debris before it could even react. The Tyrant fleet had no time to adjust. They were blindsided. Before they could even understand what had just happened, the human warship vanished again, reappearing in another position, ready to strike again. This is it, Lieutenant Sarah said with determination. We have them where we want them. Eric nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. They were on the offensive now. The human warship was striking from unexpected angles, picking off Tyrant ships one by one. The enemy fleet began to scatter, struggling to regroup, their formations breaking down under the relentless assault. In the midst of the chaos, Admiral Kresh stood on the bridge of his flagship, his hands shaking with rage. The Tyrant Empire had always been the apex predator of the galaxy, feared by all. Yet here they were, on the defensive, struggling to keep up with a single human warship. He had underestimated them. He had thought they were an easy target, something to crush underfoot. But he was beginning to understand. The humans had something the Tyrant had never anticipated: adaptability. The battle raged on, but the tide had undeniably shifted. The human warship struck with precision, overwhelming the Tyrant fleet with every attack. Their momentum was unstoppable, and the Tyrant, now facing a rapidly growing sense of dread, were starting to realize that humanity was not just a nuisance. It was a force to be reckoned with. Admiral, a lieutenant called out from behind. We've lost 2 more ships. The humans, they're unstoppable. Kresh's face twisted in disbelief. Impossible. How are they doing this? His voice was barely a whisper, more to himself than anyone else. But the answer was simple. The humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something more. They had been underestimated, but now, the Tyrant Empire would know the true meaning of the word reckoning. The battle had escalated into a full-scale war in the stars. The once feared Tyrant fleet was now in disarray, struggling to keep up with the relentless assault of the human warship. Captain Eric and his crew were no longer just defending. They were driving the Tyrant back, taking the fight to their enemy's doorstep. The human warship had already taken out several of the Tyrant's strongest ships, and now it was on the hunt for the flagship. Eric knew that taking down the Tyron flagship would send a message that could not be ignored. But it wouldn't be easy. The Tyron were regrouping, and their forces were still formidable. But Eric had a plan. A dangerous plan. "Prepare for a direct strike," Eric ordered, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We're going straight for their flagship. No more hit and run. We end this now." The crew moved with precision, knowing that the captain's orders were final. The tension on the bridge was palpable as they navigated their ship through the chaos of space. The Tyron flagship was ahead, surrounded by a dozen smaller vessels, but the human warship was fast and agile. The Tyron didn't expect them to be so bold. "Captain, we're in range," Lieutenant Sarah called out, her fingers flying across the control panels, ready to launch a full offensive. Eric took a deep breath and nodded. "Fire everything we've got. Aim for their shields first." The human warship's weapons came to life, firing an intense barrage of energy blasts that streaked through space toward the Tyron flagship. The Tyron ships around the flagship attempted to intercept, but the human ship was too quick, moving like a shadow in the vastness of space. The first few hits slammed into the Tyron flagship's shields, weakening them. Another round of fire, and the shields flickered and failed. "Direct hit on their main shields," Sarah reported. "They're vulnerable now." The crew of the human warship held their breath. This was the moment that would decide everything. "Take us in," Eric ordered. "Close the distance. We finish this." The human ship shot forward, its weapons unleashing a torrent of firepower. The Tyron flagship, now exposed, began to retaliate, but the human warship was faster. It darted and weaved, avoiding blasts while continuing to pound away at the flagship's vulnerable points. Inside the Tyron flagship, Admiral Kresh was sweating. He had never faced an enemy like this before. His fleet was in disarray, and the human ship seemed unstoppable. "Divert all power to the main cannons," Kresh shouted. "We'll take them down now." But it was too late. The human warship had already reached the flagship, and in a final devastating blow, they launched a massive torpedo directly into the heart of the Tyron ship. The explosion that followed was enormous, an eruption of fire and metal that consumed the flagship in an instant. The remaining Tyron ships were thrown into confusion. Without their flagship, their fleet began to crumble, unable to keep up with the precision and force of the human assault. They tried to regroup, but they were already too scattered. The Tyron were no longer fighting a war. They were fighting for survival. "Flagship is down," Sarah shouted, her voice filled with disbelief and awe. "We've done it, Captain. The Tyron are finished." Eric's heart raced as he watched the Tyron fleet break apart. Their reinforcements were still in transit, but it didn't matter now. The human warship had proven that they could defeat the mighty Tyron Empire. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. But Eric knew that this was only one battle in a much larger war. The Tyron might have been defeated today, but there would be others, other empires, other forces who would test humanity's resolve. But for now, Earth had won a decisive victory, and the Tyron would forever remember the day they underestimated humanity. As the last of the Tyron ships were destroyed or fled, Eric allowed himself a moment to breathe. He turned to Sarah, a smile tugging at his lips. "We did it," he said. "But this war isn't over. Not by a long shot." She nodded, her face set in determination. "We'll be ready, Captain." Eric looked out into the vastness of space, knowing that humanity had finally made its mark. They had shown the universe that Earth was not to be trifled with, and that would change everything. But the war was far from over. The Tyron had fallen, but there were others waiting, watching, and humanity was ready. In the wake of humanity's victory over the Tyron, the galaxy was quiet, too quiet. The human warship had returned to Earth, its mission complete, but the lingering tension in the air suggested that this peace was only temporary. On Earth, celebrations were held, but there were no cheers on the bridge of the warship. Captain Eric, though proud of their victory, knew that their success had made them a target. The Tyran might have been powerful, but they weren't the only threat in the galaxy. Captain, we've received strange readings from the outer edges of the solar system. Sarah, the chief communications officer, said as she scrolled through the data. It's not Tyran ships. This is something else. Eric's brow furrowed as he stepped closer to the console. What kind of readings? It's hard to tell, she replied, her fingers flying over the controls. But it's definitely not anything human. Something massive is moving out there, and it's headed directly for Earth. The bridge crew fell silent. The Tyran had been a major force, but there were rumors of other empires lurking in the shadows. The human warship had taken down the Tyran, but Eric knew the fight for Earth's survival was far from over. Are we sure it's hostile? Eric asked, his voice steady despite the unease that was creeping up inside him. I can't say for certain, Captain, but given the trajectory and their speed, I don't think they're here for a peaceful visit. A chill ran through the crew. Eric turned to the tactical officer, Lieutenant Carter, who was already analyzing the data. Prepare the warship for another mission, Eric said. We're going out there to meet whatever this is head on. The crew didn't need any more orders. They knew what was coming. The warship had barely returned to Earth, and now it was being called back into action. With quick precision, they began the process of refueling and rearming. The human warship was a symbol of Earth's power, and it would have to prove itself again, no matter what was waiting beyond the solar system. As the warship powered up and made its way out of Earth's atmosphere, Eric stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the dark expanse of space ahead. His mind raced as he tried to prepare for whatever this new threat was. Was it another empire looking to conquer Earth like the Tyran? Or was it something even more dangerous? We're entering the unknown, Eric murmured to himself. But we will be ready. Earth will always fight. Outside the warship, space seemed peaceful. But inside the cockpit, the crew was anything but calm. Every crew member knew that the universe was filled with dangers, and after the Tyran's defeat, they had to be prepared for anything. Lieutenant Carter spoke again, breaking the silence. The object is getting closer, Captain. It's enormous. Bigger than anything we've ever encountered. Eric felt his pulse quicken. If this new force was anything like the Tyran, if not more powerful, they would have to think fast. This wasn't a time to be reckless. Eric knew that Earth had only one chance to survive, and it all rested on his decisions. As they neared the unknown object, it finally came into full view. It was a colossal ship, unlike anything they had ever seen. The ship was black as night, with an eerie organic design that seemed to pulse and shift. There were no markings, no obvious weapons, but the sheer size of it was enough to send a wave of dread through Eric's chest. Report, Eric demanded. It's definitely not from any known species in the galaxy, Captain, Sarah replied. We're getting close enough to get clearer scans now. The readings are off the charts. This is no ordinary fleet. Eric knew they had to act. The unknown ship was too close to Earth now, and its intentions were unclear. He couldn't afford to wait and see if it was a peaceful encounter. Earth had already survived one invasion. He wasn't going to let it fall again. Bring us in closer, Eric ordered. Let's see what we're dealing with. The warship moved cautiously, the tension palpable on the bridge. As they got closer, the massive ship's size became even more overwhelming. It was like nothing Earth had ever seen before, and yet there was something familiar about it. The designs, the way it moved, it almost looked alive. Just then, a chilling transmission crackled over the ship's communication system. It was a voice, deep and resonant, filled with an authority that made even the most battle-hardened crew member shiver. Humans, you are bold, but you have made a grave mistake. This galaxy belongs to us, and you are nothing but an obstacle. The voice sent a wave of tension through the crew. Eric's hands clenched into fists. There was no more time for preparation, no more time to think. Earth was under threat once more, and this time, the enemy was unlike any they had faced before. "We're not backing down," Eric said, his voice low but full of resolve. "Brace for impact." As the crew braced themselves for the unknown battle ahead, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The fight for Earth was far from over, and this new enemy would stop at nothing to crush humanity's defiance. The universe was watching, and humanity's fate rested in their hands. The massive alien ship loomed just beyond the human warship, its eerie design casting a shadow over everything in its path. Eric could feel the tension rising, the air thick with uncertainty and fear. The communication system crackled again, the deep, foreboding voice resonating through the ship like a heavy drumbeat. "We have given you a warning. Surrender, and your world will be spared. Resist, and you will be wiped from the galaxy." Captain Eric stood firm at the helm, his expression unwavering. The galaxy had underestimated humanity before, and now, as he looked at the alien ship, he knew that their prideful threats meant nothing. Humanity had something they didn't: the spirit to survive. "We don't surrender," Eric said, his voice steady. "We fight." The crew behind him stood tall, resolute. They knew what was at stake. Earth's survival was on the line. But more than that, humanity's determination to thrive was what had always set them apart from the rest of the galaxy. The warship's weapon systems powered up, and Eric could hear the hum of the ship's engines as they prepared for battle. "Captain," Lieutenant Carter called from the tactical station, "the enemy ship is moving toward us. They're charging up weapons." "We've got no time to waste," Eric said, his voice tight with resolve. "Initiate countermeasures. Prepare for battle." The crew sprang into action, each person moving with the precision that came from countless hours of training and experience. The warship's powerful cannons were primed, ready to unleash their fury on the incoming threat. But as Eric watched the enemy ships approach, he knew this wouldn't be an easy fight. The alien vessel was enormous, far bigger than anything humanity had ever encountered. It was unlike the Tyrant, different in every way, yet no less dangerous. The first shot was fired from the alien ship. A beam of energy shot out, crackling with destructive force, heading straight for Earth's warship. The crew braced for impact, but the human ship's shields flared to life, absorbing the blow and sending ripples of energy throughout the hull. The shields held, just barely. "They've got powerful weapons," Sarah said, her voice tense. "But we've got something they don't have." "And what's that?" Eric asked, not taking his eyes off the incoming threat. "Human ingenuity," she replied, a confident smile crossing her face. "We can adapt faster than any enemy." Eric nodded. "Let's show them just how creative we can be." He gave the order, and the warship lurched into motion, evading another blast from the alien ship. The crew worked together seamlessly, coordinating their attacks and maneuvers. They fired back with everything they had, launching waves of missiles and energy blasts at the alien ship. But despite the ferocity of the human counterattack, the alien ship was still a formidable opponent. The warship's missiles exploded against its shield, barely leaving a scratch on its surface. The crew felt the pressure mounting, but they didn't give up. They couldn't. The fate of Earth was at stake, and they knew the galaxy was watching. Humanity would not fall quietly. "Captain, we've got a new issue," Carter called out. "There's another fleet arriving from the rear. It's more of them." Eric's eyes narrowed. "Another fleet? How many?" "Too many to count," Carter said grimly. "We're surrounded." For a moment, it felt like the walls were closing in. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Eric refused to let fear take hold. There was no retreat, no backing down. "We've fought harder battles than this," Eric said, his voice firm and confident. "We've won against impossible odds before, and we will do it again." He turned to Sarah. "Send a distress signal to Earth. Reinforcements are on the way." "But we're not waiting for them," We'll make our stand here." The crew nodded in agreement, rallying behind their captain. The warship fired another barrage of missiles, its weapons unleashing a torrent of destruction against the alien fleet. The skies around them erupted in fiery explosions, and the human warship danced through the chaos, dodging incoming fire with incredible precision. But even with all their skill and courage, the alien fleet's overwhelming numbers began to take a toll. The warship's shields flickered, weakening under the relentless barrage. Eric could feel the ship groaning as it absorbed another hit. "We need something big," Eric muttered. He looked out into space, seeing the enemy ships closing in, and then his eyes locked onto the alien flagship, the massive ship at the center of the fleet. "Target the flagship," Eric ordered. "Full power to the main guns. Let's end this." The warship's weapon systems hummed, charging up with energy. The crew worked together, synchronizing their attack as the ship aimed at the heart of the alien fleet. Then, with a resounding roar, the warship unleashed its most powerful shot yet. The blast hit the alien flagship square in the center, its shields flaring as the energy beam tore through the alien vessel's hull. The flagship shuddered, then erupted in a blinding explosion. The surrounding ships faltered, momentarily disoriented by the loss of their command vessel. "We've got them on the run," Carter shouted, as the alien fleet began to retreat. But Eric knew this wasn't over. The aliens might have been forced to retreat for now, but this battle had proven one thing: humanity could not be underestimated. They had faced impossible odds, fought back against overwhelming enemies, and come out victorious. "This isn't just a victory for us," Eric said quietly, staring out at the stars. "It's a message to the galaxy. We are humanity, and we will never back down." As the warship turned toward Earth, the crew allowed themselves a moment of relief. They had faced the unknown, survived the impossible, and emerged stronger than ever. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson that day. Humanity was not to be underestimated.